Today I'm going to show you how to make this delicious pumpkin loaf, and we're going to do 2 loaves. The recipe that I'm using makes 2 loaves, so we're going to do 1 in the oven and 1 in the bread machine. Hello you bread machine lovers, bakers of bread, makers of the home. Welcome to Butterfly Meadows Homestead, where the dough rises, hearts are warmed, and bodies are nourished. From baking and cooking to canning and preserving, we celebrate all things homesteading. Together, let's create delicious food that nourishes both your body and soul. Today we are going to be making a delicious pumpkin loaf, and we're going to bake 1 in the bread machine and 1 in the oven, so you can decide which way you want to bake your pumpkin bread. This recipe makes 2 large loaves, so it's very easy for me to divide it and put half in the bread machine and half in a loaf pan. First, let's go over the ingredients you're going to need to make this pumpkin bread. You're going to need 3 cups of white sugar, 4 eggs, a can of pumpkin puree, 1 cup of oil, a half a cup of buttermilk, 4 cups of all-purpose flour. Then you're going to need your spices. I have here 2 teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice, and if you don't want to use some of these other spices, you could just increase this to 3 teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice, or even 4 if you really like it spicy. But you're going to need 2 teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice, a half a teaspoon of cloves, ground clove, 2 teaspoons of ground nutmeg, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, 1/4 of a teaspoon of black pepper, 2 teaspoons of baking soda, 1½ teaspoons of salt, and 2 teaspoons of vanilla. I'm using clear vanilla, but you can use the dark vanilla if you want. And this is optional, but if you would want to add nuts, you're going to need about a cup of chopped walnuts. You can leave the nuts out if you don't want to add nuts. And it's a good idea to have a way to sift your ingredients, because the recipe calls for us to sift the ingredients together, the dry ingredients. So I have here my sifter. Now let's jump into mixing this all together. First, I want to note that I have my oven preheating to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And the first thing I'm going to do in this bowl is I'm going to mix together my sugar and my eggs. Now you don't have to whip them or mix them heavily, just have to mix them together until they're kind of mixed up together. Now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to sift together our seasonings and our flour. So our dry ingredients. We are going to use the sifter and mix them together. So I'm going to put in some of the flour, and then some of the seasonings. And just keep doing this until I get it all sifted together. So by sifting these together, we accomplished 2 things. 1, we sifted our flour, and we also helped to ensure that our spices are mixed in, but you still want to mix it together, make sure all your spices are mixed in before you start adding the liquids. And I just want to note that anytime you are using a recipe that calls for baking powder or baking soda, it is important that you don't add the liquids to that ingredient too soon. It is a chemical reaction that takes place, and that's what gives you the rise in whatever it is you're baking. And if you mix the liquids with the baking soda or baking powder too soon, then you're going to lose some of that rise because the chemical reaction is going to have already taken place. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our sugar and eggs to the mixture. And we're going to add our oil. Then we're going to add our pumpkin puree. And our ½ cup of buttermilk. Now I'm going to use my hand mixer to continue mixing this together. You just want to mix it until it's mixed together and you don't see any dry spots. You don't need to over mix it. And I'm just going to rake around with the spatula to make sure I didn't miss any flour. And now we're going to add in our nuts. Oops, and we forgot the vanilla. Let's add that in. It's not too late. Now I have oiled my bread pan that goes into my bread machine, and here I have lined my baking pan with parchment paper, and I also oiled it. But you don't necessarily have to use the parchment paper unless you just want to, but I decided that I would. Now I'm going to put probably not quite half. I'll show you how full I have this. It might be about half, and then I'm going to put the rest into my loaf pan. And I'm actually going to take just a little bit out of the bread pan because I don't want too much to be, try to get it as even as I possibly can. And I'm happy with that. I'm just going to fix where I got that up here on the sides. You can smooth it out if you want. Okay, so now I'm going to place this in my 350-degree oven, and it's going to bake for anywhere from an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. And we will begin checking it at close to an hour to see if it's done. And we're going to put our other half into the bread machine. We want to go down to menu option number 14. And it starts out with a 10-minute bake time. And I want to bump this up. So the KBS bread machine will only go to an hour and 10 minutes, and that's the option I'm going to choose, an hour and 10 minutes of bake time. If it gets done before that, I will take it out. We're going to hit start. And if you notice, the bake light is not flashing. On the KBS machine, on the bake cycle, you have to hit the start button twice. And when you do, you see the bake will begin to flash. Now it is on and beginning to bake. Now, we can go ahead and look in here now, but now do not open your bread machine again until it gets closer to an hour, because you don't want to let the heat out and we don't want a doughy loaf. If you have a question, please leave it in the comments below. I do my best to get to all the comments and respond to them. If you're enjoying these videos, please like the video to help YouTube know they should promote it. Watch it all the way to the end. That also helps the algorithm say, hey, that's a video that people like and love. And share this video with your friends, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so. I am so happy to have you here in our community. The loaf we have in the oven is ready to come out. And here you can see the beautiful loaf, and it has a crack on the top. That's what you want to see. That crack on the top means you did it right. We're going to let this cool for just a moment in the pan, and then we will take it out and let it finish cooling on the wire rack. Now our loaf that is in the bread machine is not quite done. And I have not opened the lid of the bread machine, but I have taken a light and looked inside of the machine, and I can see that the top is not quite done. Now it has 3 minutes left, and I will see if it's done when that 3 minutes is up. I will, look through. I'm not going to open the door, and if it's not, I will turn it on for another 5 or 10 minutes, because we want to make sure that it gets done. Now this was a larger loaf in the bread machine. Normally I don't put quite as large a loaf in the bread machine because it does take it so long to get done. And this was a larger loaf. I probably put more in the bread machine pan than I should have, and should have put more in this large loaf pan. But nonetheless, we will get it done. I don't want to open the lid. So I will try to let you see what it looks like through the glass when I get ready to add minutes. While we're waiting for the bread machine bread to finish, I'm going to go ahead and take our loaf out of our pan, and I can just lift it out with the parchment paper. So easy. I'm just going to slide it off the parchment paper. We're just going to let that cool right here on this rack. So the 10 minutes is up, the extra 10 minutes, and you can see we have the beginning of a crack there on top, and it is, it is not sunken in there, but I think it needs about another 5 minutes. So I'm going to add 5 more minutes to the baking. Well, 10 minutes is the lowest option I can get, so I'm going to go ahead and go with 10, and I can take it out if it gets done before that. So our loaf that we put in the bread machine has been baking for an hour and a half. So 90 minutes it has been baking, and I think it's pretty much done. We may have a little bit of a dense spot on the top. I don't know, we'll see after it cools. If it is, when I take it out and it cools, it'll sink on top. But that's because I put too much in my pan. If you follow the recipe for the 1 loaf in the bread machine, this should not happen to you. So we'll go ahead and turn the keep warm off. We do have the crack on the top that we love to see, but I do think it's going to be a little bit of a dense spot on the top, but that's okay. So I'm going to let it sit here and cool in the bread machine for a few minutes, in the bread pan, before I take it out. Now, if we were making yeasty bread, sandwich bread, we wouldn't let it sit, we wouldn't want it to sweat, but because I don't want it to stick, I'm going to let it sit in the pan until everything can cool off a little bit, and it'll be easier to get out of the pan. All right, so our bread machine bread has been cooled, and it is ready to come out of the pan. It came out very easy. I'm just going to turn it over here. Now, I just want to show you that little sunken in place on the top. Now, if you have watched my banana bread video, you can see that here. I explain what causes this. What caused this is too much. I had too much in the bread pan. It was just too much to get done in the bread machine, and that's because I just guessed as I was dividing these two. I wanted so much to show you could do it in the bread machine and in the oven, but in the description below, and I will try to put a card here on the screen and show you the recipe for just the recipe for the bread machine, so you can do half of the recipe, or maybe a little less than half the amount you will want to do in the bread machine. I will put that here so that you can have that, and you should have a loaf that comes out like this on top with the crack and not the sunken in place. This will still be fine. It's just not what was desired. But it is done. It's just that little top portion has a difficult time getting done if you have too much in your pan, or if it's too liquid. It was not too liquid, but we did have too much in the pan. Now that our loaves are cooled, we're gonna slice into them and let you see what they look like on the inside. Now, I normally would not cut my loaf right in the middle, but I'm gonna do that for you so you can see what it looks like in the center. Oh, it smells so good. And we're just going to cut off a piece here. Whoops, it's a little thin. We are going to give it a taste test. That is delicious. It's perfect. It's moist. It's sweet. Sweet enough, but not too sweet. It's wonderful for breakfast. We eat it many times for breakfast. And you can also serve it as a dessert. If you want, you can sprinkle powdered sugar on the top as well. Now, I'm going to slice into the bread machine loaf for those of you interested in seeing what that looks like. And I'm going to slice it in the middle as well. Now, as you can see, it didn't quite get done here on the very top, and that's why it's sunken in there on the top. But it's still perfectly fine to eat, and like I said, this will not happen to you if you follow the recipe for the bread machine loaf. This happened to me because I put too much in my bread pan. And it's just good to know that the bread machine just does not handle a really wet batters well. And when you are using something like a batter, like in a banana bread or a pumpkin bread or whatever, the amount matters, because it's just a small bread machine and it can't bake the way an oven does, and moisture doesn't escape from, I think the main reason is moisture doesn't escape from the bread machine like it does in your oven. You know, your oven has vents. When you're baking or cooking, you may notice that steam comes out up here in your oven. That's because it lets the steam out, and that doesn't happen in a bread machine. So we have to adjust our recipes accordingly, whether it be by size or the amount of liquid in the recipe. Be sure and watch my other videos here. God bless. Bye-bye.